Mr. Chair, we received a message from the City of Richmond. Mayor Stoney is having some technical issues this morning, and we're waiting for Charles City County and Powhatan County.
Landfill cares. There's an image on it. Somebody's painted an image on it, and we stayed out of it because it's clearly a First Amendment issue. It's on our right of way, and people are.
Do we have enough to start?
Yes, sir, I believe we have a quorum.
Okay, okay. Good morning, everyone. It is 8:34, and I welcome you this morning to the proceedings of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. And it is a lovely morning outside. So I want to welcome each of you. And hopefully everyone is in good health or has a modicum of good health. At this time, if you care to stand, if you don't have to, we will go through the Pledge of Allegiance, okay, which we will lead this, okay? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. In the future, perhaps before we leave, I would want to ask at least twice, so this is my first time, I want to ask permission when I call that forth. And it's not to be showboating, but just for differences, I want to do that in French. Okay, the statement of the virtual meeting, everyone is aware of that. Okay, and at this time, Madam Clerk, we have a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Charles City County, Mr. Coda. Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
I'm here.
Goochland County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Here.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Here.
New Kent County, Ms. Page.
Present.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams. City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney.
Here.
Virginia House of Delegates, Delegate McQuinn.
Present.
Senate of Virginia, Senator McClellan.
Here.
Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Here.
Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, Ms. Mitchell.
Here.
Virginia Department of Transportation, Mr. Mann.
Here.
GRTC Transit System, Ms. Tim.
Here.
And Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority, Ms. Dean.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And again, good morning to all of the commissioners. Okay, at this time we go into administrative items. So item A1, consideration of amendments of action for the meeting agenda today. Are there any additions? If not, will someone move that? Could I have someone move that we don't need that?
Move adoption of the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Motion is made and probably second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
All right. All right, we go to item 2, approval of March 26th, which each of you graciously were seated at that meeting. This is the CVTA minutes, okay? And we request action on this one. Can we get a motion?
Mr.
Canova
Chairman.
Peterson, move for approval, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay. Motion has been approved and second. All those-
Mr. Chair, may I ask who seconded it, please?
McQuinn.
Thank you, Delegate McQuinn.
All those in favor, vote aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, as have it, and the minutes are adopted. Okay, at this time, we have what's called the open public comment period. Speakers may address the authority up to 3 minutes on any matters relevant to the body. Speakers are requested, though, to give their name, locality in which they reside, and if appropriate, the organization they represent. Members of the public may also submit comments through the chat function. So are there any persons who have in line on?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any requests to address the authority this morning.
There were no requests, okay? All
Mr. Chair, this is Chet Parsons. I would like to let the authority know that we did receive one email question that was not directed to either the authority or the technical committee. And the question was related to the infrastructure bill and local road and sidewalk projects. I'd be happy to read that out loud, but staff's recommendation is to refer that request to the TAC for a consideration, and then they can bring it back to the authority if there's more questions that need to be answered.
right. Why don't we do that? Send that to the committee. Okay.
Yes, sir.
At this time, then, we will have the chairman's report, and the chair would like to report the following. The chair has put together a nomination committee, and this committee is to submit slave officers at the July organizational meeting of election. The bylaws do not specify specific membership or number of committee members. So 4 commissioners have graciously honored us by being on this committee, and they are Mrs. Patricia Page, Mr. W. Canova Peterson, Mr. John Hodges, and Mr. David Williams. Those are then the members of the nomination committee. And that committee is to bring back 3 positions, that of chair, vice chair, and chair of finance. And any way that we can be of help to provide information for you, we'd be more than happy to do that. I want to thank Ms. Page for chairing this group there. Okay. Are there any questions on that, anyone? Now we move to the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Eric Gregory. The nominating committee appointments that you have made as chairman are proper, and it is, however, it is subject to approval by the authority. So I might recommend a motion to approve the nominating committee as presented.
That's why you're there. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, the chair will entertain a vote on the nomination committee.
Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion to approve. Kevin Carroll.
Second.
Motion has been made, properly second. Okay, this should be a roll call vote, Mr. Gregory.
It's not necessary to be a roll call vote necessarily.
Okay. All
If
those-
Ms. Mueller could just take the vote, that'd be great.
All those in favor, vote aye.
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 You
Aye.
vote?
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it, and the committee is established. Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Thank you.
Now we move to B1. Revenue projections, distributions, administrative and operating expense budget, public hearing. Ms. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to put this before the board today. This is the second time that you have seen the operating and expense budget, but we have included, following the Finance Committee meeting last week, the FY 2022 revenue projections that also show the mathematical computations of the distribution for the 35% regional fund, the 50% local distribution, and the 15% transit set aside. So this is here for your information, and subject to the public hearing, we would then, following any comments that we received from the public, entertain or ask the authority to consider approval of the revenue projections for fiscal year 2022, the distributions, and the administrative and operating expense budget. I am happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Any questions from Mrs. Peter for the revenue projection, distribution, administrative, operating expense budget?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Canova Peterson, I'm looking at the screen. If this is a public hearing, we probably should have the budget on the screen for the public to see.
I will move there
Yes,
right now.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. And here's a copy of that budget.
So again, this is the summary of the revenues projected for fiscal year 2022 and the distribution of those revenues with the $500,000 set aside for the operating budget. And then after that set aside for the operating budget, the distributions of the 15% for transit, the 35% for regional projects, and the 50%, excuse me, for local distributions. We have conferred with Hanover and Ashland staff to confirm that these are estimates at this point in time until the summer, when the new estimations for distribution of revenue according to the school age populations are released. But otherwise, the finance work group and other members of local staff have had a chance to review this. And then on the second page, we give the detail of the fiscal year 2022 proposed administrative and operating expense budget. I believe that the staff report does indicate also that the information for the audit request for proposals has come in. And so while previous versions and the version included here that was advertised does set aside $15,000 for the audit services for fiscal year 2022, we do know that the quotation for that has come in at $19,000. And so if the authority would like, they could make an amendment to the as published proposed expense administrative and operating expense budget to transfer that additional $4,000 from the reserve for contingency line item. It would not change the overall expense budget or the distributions shown on the first page.
Are there any questions for Ms. Heater?
Mr. Chairman, this is David Williams. I apologize for joining the meeting late.
That's fine, Ms. Williams. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to, be able to let everybody know that, I was, late joining the meeting and ready to participate. So thank you, sir.
And since that you have joined us, Ms. Williams, I did share with the commission the members of the nominating committee, of which your name was included.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Any other questions at all on this budget, anyone? If not, there's action that's requested on this, so.
Mr. Chair, if you would, I think we would want to open the public hearing before the board would take action.
Okay. For the public hearing part, I think we have the comments may be submitted also via email, and it gives that address. Okay.
Mr. Parsons or Ms. Mueller, do we have anyone that wanted to address the authority with regard to the budget?
No, ma'am, we didn't receive any requests for speaking time this morning. Or written
Thank you. Then,
comments through
Mr.
email.
Thornton, if you open the public comment period, and then I believe because we have no one here, you could close the public comment period and then ask the authority to vote.
Okay, the public comment period has been open, and according to the information shared, no one has raised any questions, so we will close it at this point in time.
Mr. Chair, Kevin Carroll, just have a question on the increase in cost on the audit. Is I know we budgeted 15,000. I think the estimate came in at 19,000. Is there any indication as to, I guess we were just off? Is that why we were low on that, or is there any reason why it came in higher?
At the time that we put the budget together, we were not through the RFP process yet. And so the final negotiations did result in the negotiation of the CVTA portion of the contract at 19,000. The PB Mayors, the firm that was selected, is providing audit services to both the HR TAC and the CBTA, and that was procured and contracted through a joint effort administered from the Auditor of Public Accounts. I will say that the contract amount of 19,000 does include access to additional what I'll refer to as advisory services from the firm above and beyond the audit. And so we felt like it was a reasonable amount still, but it is outside of what we had originally penciled in for the budget line item.
In that case, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to amend the budget to include the increase from 15,000 to 19,000 for that expense. Motion to approve.
David Williams. David Williams, Powhatan. I second that motion.
The motion has been made, properly second. All those in favor vote aye.
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 You opposed? Okay, so the motion is carried. Okay, so that would be the addition, Ms. Heaton, to add to the budget item there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
May I say this, just for perspective, sometimes when we have new organizations, and I really appreciate Mr. Carroll's question too, but when we have new organizations and they're in their embryonic stage, one of the things we want to make sure with all of the financial dealings is that we have responsibility. So we want to always watch out for making sure that whenever we have with these contracts, that we're getting the service that we request. It's very important that we have that. So I just want to mention that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I was unclear with respect to Mr. Carroll's motion. I believe I'm not sure I heard it clearly. Was that a motion to approve the budget as amended, or was it just to amend the draft budget presented?
Motion was to approve as amended, to make the amendment and approve. That was the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Mr. Chairman, could I suggest a roll call vote since it has to do with the budget, please?
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and take the roll. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Mr. Carroll, can you hear?
Can you hear me? I said aye.
I can hear you now. Thank you, sir. Goochland County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
And CTB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Gregory. Okay. Okay, now we move to C, committee reports. And this first report is the CVTA Finance Committee update. Mayor Stoney.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for the opportunity and the continued honor to work with the authority in this capacity as chair of the Finance Committee. In this role, I'm always striving to align, excuse me, the financial management and oversight with needs of the authority. At our April's meeting, Matt Harris, CVTA fiscal agent from Chesterfield, presented projections for the fiscal year 2022 by jurisdiction. This information is available on the CVTA website, and also provided was a CVTA tax collections and allocations through FY21. I don't know whether or not our team can put those tax collections and allocations for the fiscal year ended in June 30, 2021 on the screen, but I will provide a brief summary of that report. Total receipt of tax revenue to CVTA was $66,024,786. Total local distributions was $32,762,393. The regional balance was $22,933,897, and the total distributed to GRTC was $9,828,718 total. As the Finance Committee and I continue to help move the authority forward, there have been a number of key discussions that have taken place to ensure our member localities are operating with the same financial outlook that we all envision for the region. One of those discussions that occurred at the April Finance Committee was that of the regional priority projects. The committee discussed and wanted to privy the entire authority members with our directive to have CVTA staff to continue the schedules of each of our administrators in order for them to convene, discuss, and provide their guidance and expertise on priority projects for the region. We hope that all the administrators will work with the CVTA staff to have this completed before our May CVTA full body meeting. With that, if there are no questions, then for today's formal committee report, there are two agenda items. The first is the draft memorandum of agreement between the CVTA and GRTC. And the second is a first for the CVTA, a roundtable discussion from our fellow regional funding entities in the Commonwealth, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, MVTA, and the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, HRTAC. So now on to item A. Item A is the draft memorandum of agreement, the MOA with the GRTC. During the April Finance Committee meeting, Mr. Gregory discussed that all localities and GRTC had reviewed and all were in agreement with the language in the draft MOA. Also, along with the MOA process, the Finance Committee has since added GRTC's Chief Financial Officer to the Finance Directors Working Group, so that GRTC can be involved and aware of the developments of the committee. Lastly, in regard to the MOA for all localities, Mr. Gregory stated that there would be an extended time frame for the localities to have their MOAs drafted and reviewed. Now I would ask, Mr. Chair, if there isn't any further discussion, that there be a roll call vote on the committee's recommendation to approve the draft memorandum of agreement with GRTC.
For the commission, are there any questions anyone needs to ask Mayor Stoney before we take the roll call vote? Any questions? If not, Madam Clerk, at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The authority will now be voting on the approval of the draft memorandum of agreement with Grtc. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Goochland County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
And CTB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I want to welcome Monica Bachman and Kevin Page to our meeting. They and CVTA staff will lead the authority in a roundtable discussion about authority staffing.
Mr. Chair, this is
Ms.
Chet
Bachman
Parsons.
and Mr. Page.
Mr. Stoney, Mayor Stoney, Mr. Chair, this is Chet Parsons. I'd suggest we have presentations from both guests, and if we could start with Ms. Bachman, we have her queued up, and I can share my screen now, and then would suggest moving into discussion and question and answer, however you would prefer, Mr. Chair.
Maybe be more efficacious at the end of each presentation so we can stay on our timetable.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good morning. I'm Monica Bachman, the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. Thank you for having me here this morning. And I will just ask Chet to advance to the next slide. So and I'm not going to get into each of these, but as you can note, there are several bills that govern the authority. SB 576 was our enabling legislation, which created the authority. We had HB 3202 in 2007, which was the initial transportation funding bill that passed, ultimately failed on appeal. We have HB 599, which governed how we did our performance-based evaluation for project selection. Of course, there was HB 2313, which was the second transportation funding bill. And then we have a plethora of other bills that really govern the work and operations of the authority. Next slide. Membership. The authority is composed of 17 members. We have one elected official from each of our 9 member jurisdictions. We have 4 counties and 5 cities. And then we have several members that make up the rest of the authority. This includes a chief elected officer of one town, which is one town in a county, which the authority embraces. And this town has to have a population of 3,500 or more. There are currently 5 towns in Northern Virginia that meet that threshold, but they rotate membership on an annual basis. We have the Commonwealth Transportation Board Commissioner or his or her designee, which is usually via Northern Virginia District Administrator. We have the Director of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation or his or her designee. We also have 3 members of the General Assembly. We have 1 state senator and 2 members of the House of Delegates. And then we have 2 gubernatorial appointees. One of those appointees is a citizen member and the other is a member of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Next slide, please. So the authority, we have 3 budgets, and I'll talk about those budgets in a little more detail in the following slides. But we have a regional revenue fund budget, a local distribution budget, and an operating budget. Next slide. So according to HB 2313, which was the transportation funding bill that governed the funding that we currently have and administer, our revenues, I know that yours is split 50-50. The authority's revenues is split 70-30. So 70% of the regional funds, which is the regional revenue fund, comes to the authority. And we are to use that funding to provide for transportation projects, regional transportation projects for the region. So what that means, and in the law, it details how we are to use it. The authority shall give priority to selecting projects that are expected to provide the greatest level of congestion reduction relative to cost. And again, I noted HB 599 because HB 599 does highlight some performance measures that we are to look at when we are doing our analysis, in addition to our enabling legislation. So we do have a performance-based process when doing our evaluations for the 70% regional revenues. When HB 2313 was adopted, it was expected to generate about $300 million plus annually for transportation. I will note that there were some years that we were trending a lot higher than the 300 million. Other years we were really on par. And I note we are entering our 8th year since the revenue started to come to the authority. Next slide. Then we have the 30%. The 30% distribution fund is the 30% that goes back to the localities, which the taxes and fees are raised. Now, as I noted previously, 30% goes to the localities, and these localities are the 9-member jurisdictions. It's the 5 cities and the 4 counties in Northern Virginia. However, they do not get that 30% automatically. According to the law, the localities must enact a local commercial and industrial property tax at 12 cents per $100 valuation, or dedicate an equivalent amount to transportation. They must do this. We certify this on an annual basis. If a locality does not achieve the certification process, their 30% for that particular year goes back into the 70% regional revenue fund. That is really what the law stipulates. I am pleased to announce, however, we have not had that happen to date. The law stipulates the uses of the 30%. It can be used for urban or secondary road construction, capital improvements that reduce congestion, transportation capital improvements, which have been approved in the authority's most recent long-range transportation plan, or for other public transportation purposes. The long-range transportation plan part is very important, and going back to the 70%. The law states that the authority can only fund a project that's in our long-range transportation plan for the 70% revenues. Only fund a project that's in that long-range transportation plan. And then these projects must undergo one of the bills that I noted, the HB 599 evaluation process. So we do see the similarities for the 70% funds and the 30% funds. And I will note the authority we pay on a reimbursement basis. We do so to ensure that there are no issues where someone runs afoul of the law. And we want to make it, because if you do, there are I guess, issues or penalties in the transportation funding bill that notes what happens if we have an occurrence where someone or a locality or agency runs afoul of the law. So we pay on a reimbursement basis to make sure that the revenues that are going out are consistent with the adopted scope and scale of the projects. Next slide, please. Staffing, leveraging resources. So when the HB 2313 was initially adopted, the authority had no staff. We did have responsibilities under the law even before the transportation funding bill was adopted, but we really had the locality and agency staff doing that work. When the funding bill was adopted, we had an initial staff of 6. In our enabling legislation, it notes that the authority shall have a chief executive officer. And I am the executive director, so I serve that purpose. But we started with the formulation of working groups, which was a joint effort of authority members, MVTA staff, and jurisdiction and agency staff. So while we had an ED, we had a chief financial officer, we had an administrative assistant / clerk to the board, and then we had an assistant finance officer and some planners. And that was our core staff at that particular time. When we did these working groups, we had a financial working group, a planning and programming working group, and a governance working group. These working groups eventually transitioned to committees of the authority. And I will note the authority wanted to keep the staff of, or its staff small. But I will also note small is relative. No one really understood or knew what does small mean, given the varying and weight responsibility that the authority have. Staff evolved as our plans and programs were created and developed and ultimately implemented. Next slide. So our current staff today is 12. We have, again, the executive director, the clerk to the board, communications and public affairs manager, which was really important, and that position wasn't a part of our initial 6. But again, when you're dealing with taxpayer dollars and resources, you want to make sure that you're communicating not only with the authority, with constituents, but the region at large with how these taxpayer monies are being implemented. So that was very, very important. Again, we have the CFO, assistant finance officer. We also have an investment and debt manager. The authority, we do have debt. We issued debt a few years ago. We have a AA+ credit rating. So again, because of that and the amount of revenues we have an investment and debt manager, and we also have a financial analyst. And again, getting to the planning side, we have a transportation planner and programming principal, a senior planner, and 3 planners. So today we operate with a staff of 12. Is that small? To some, yes. Do we need more resources? I'm here to tell you we absolutely do. But again, getting back to some of our initial startups, initially the operating budget was paid out of the 30%. And that 30%, if you recall, is what went back to the localities for their own transportation purposes. So every dollar that went into the operating budget was a dollar that the localities did not receive for their transportation projects and initiatives. A few years ago, we did get a budget passed that allowed the authority to pay its operating budget out of the 70%. So that actually helped us with staffing, and it helped the localities keep that 30% flowing without having to pay operating costs. Next slide. We also have other staff, which I refer to as shared staff and contracted staff. We have a council of councils. So we have at this time 4 attorneys that really work for our localities who volunteer their time to assist the authority on legal matters. And again, I call it shared staff because these the attorneys, they are unpaid. We do not pay them, but the localities do volunteer their attorneys to help us with any legal issues we have. And then we have some contracted staff. We have a financial advisor. We work with PFM. We have bond counsel, and we also have a legislative liaison. I think as we grew and as we had some history under our belt, we felt that it was important that the authority had its own legislative person to help us in Richmond in getting some of our initiatives addressed down at the General Assembly. I note the future staff 5-year strategic plan. When I started with the authority, one of the questions that a few of my members would always ask, what does MVTA want to be when it grows up? So we work with the authority to develop a 5-year strategic plan. We've made sure to keep it to 5 years, given the varying dynamics. And as we walk through that plan and identify strategic goals and initiatives, that plan also serves as justification for the future staffing needs of the authority. Next slide. Committees. The authority, we have 2 statutory committees. We have a Planning Coordination Advisory Committee, which is a committee of 14 local elected officials representing the region. So of the 9 member localities of the authority, we have elected officials from each of the 9 member localities. And then we have 5 members from the 5 towns in Northern Virginia with a population of 3,500 or more. The PCAC are not the same members who serve on the authority. So it's different elected officials. And I will note our law is specific in that the membership of the authorities, when it comes to the 9 member localities, the law says it's the chief elected official or his or her designee. Then we have 3 standing committees. As I noted, the working groups transition to standing committees. So we have a finance committee. They're responsible for the audits and budgets. We have a governance and personnel committee, which is do the legislative programs and of course my review. Then we have planning and programming. This committee does the long range transportation plan and the 6-year program. And remember where I noted that the law requires any project that we fund with our 70% be in that long-range transportation plan. And I know I also created 2 committees just to continue the work and the initiatives of the authority. Next slide, please. Our core responsibilities, again, to develop the region's long-range transportation plan for Northern Virginia. We are currently in the process of updating our most recent long-range transportation plan, which was adopted in October of 2017. So this will be the second iteration since the passage of HB 2313. And then we prioritize and fund regional transportation projects with the revenues from HB 2313. Next slide. Again, with our core responsibilities, MVTA, we really function as a transportation planning organization. In addition to doing the long-range transportation plan and the 6-year programming, we set regional transportation policies and priorities. We provide general oversight of some regional programs. We advocate for transportation needs for Northern Virginia before state and federal governments. And we also recommend to the Commonwealth Transportation Board some priority projects for federal funding, including CMAQ and RSTP funds. So a lot of our duties and our core responsibilities are consistent with the Transportation Planning Organization. And this is why I will tell you, we went from a staff of 6 to 12. And I even say, and I tell the members this, 12 is, we probably do need a few more planners and another financial analyst. Because again, these responsibilities, we are continuing to grow and build upon them. Next slide. Looking ahead, additional staffing needs. I would like to bring in in-house modeling. Because we're responsible for the long-range transportation plan and doing this 6-year program, in-house modeling capability is a must. And that is something in our strategic plan. As you begin to populate your funding programs, you will often find that there are tweaks that need to be made or adjustments that need to be made to some of the projects. And for us, instead of going out and paying the consultant to do that every single time, we want to bring in some of that capability in-house. And as I noted, we're in the process of updating transaction, which is our long-range transportation plan. And we are also this summer planning to issue a call for regional transportation projects for what will be our 6th funding program since the implementation of HB 2313. To date, we have 5 funding programs. We adopted the most recent one last year. These 5 funding programs result in 106 projects valued at $2.5 billion. And I would like to note we are multimodal. Initially, when we were up and running, people say, oh, the MVTA funds highway, highway, highway. We are truly multimodal. We have funding on rail. We have funding on bus rapid transit. We have funded buses, electric vehicles, roadway widenings. We are truly multimodal. Next slide, please. And last, I'd like to leave you with this. This is the last slide. The authority, we updated our economic impact analysis that we did a few years ago when we funded our first 6-year program, just trying to get an idea of the impacts of the projects that we fund. What are the impacts that they have on the region and the Commonwealth at large? And I hope you can see this information, but we're looking at $3.3 billion of economic impacts for Northern Virginia and the Commonwealth, 30,000 jobs created, 225 hours of savings of travel time. And these are some key points we would like to message as part of our public engagement and just letting people know the impact of the projects. Now, again, our first priority is reducing congestion. These projects do have a value economically. So having said that, we anticipate trying to make sure that, number one, we have key messaging in the impacts that the authority makes, not only in Northern Virginia, but the Commonwealth at large economically, and continuing to update and let everyone know how we're going, how we're doing, and how we are measuring ourselves. Thank you. I think that was my last slide.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Bachman. That was fantastic information to share with us. Questions from the
Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos Brown. I would like to ask a couple questions. Ms. Bachman, thank you for that great presentation. And for all the work you guys are doing in Northern Virginia. We've had the pleasure of working together a little bit through the CTB. A couple questions. One, can you describe your relationship to your TPO and kind of where you cross over and where you distinguish yourselves? I think that's one of the areas we're wrestling with. Obviously, Plan RVA is supporting us. And then secondly, I'd like to understand, when did the NVTA first determine to issue bonds after its initial creation, and what was its rationale there?
Okay, thank you. Great questions. So we are essentially the transportation planning organization. Now we do have an MPO that we work with, COG, or the National Capital Transportation Planning Board. And because they are a multi-state MPO, the dynamics are a little different because TPB is comprised of Maryland, DC, Northern Virginia. We have to send our projects through the Virginia Department of Transportation down to the MPO for some air quality conformity analysis and things of that nature. The federal government requires it. They do not care what the funding source is. So we have a relationship with the MPO on that level, but we essentially are the transportation planning organization for Northern Virginia. So we do the short-term planning and the long-range planning. Now, having said that, we make sure that we have direct lines of communication with the MPO because a lot of the work and the goals and targets that the MPO sets have a direct impact on the work we do.
So was that the case prior to the NVTA being established? Who served that function prior to the NVTA being established? Was it still the MPO? So unlike the rest of the state, your federally designated TPO has always been this MPO? Since
2002, yes. And this gets back to when NVTA was created in 2002. I think there was a referendum to get the authority funding. The creation of the authority passed, but the referendum to fund the authority did not. So you had essentially the locality and agency staff volunteering their time to do some of the essential core responsibilities that was identified in the law. The development of the long-range transportation plan was one of them. But to predate the creation of the authority, we had the Transportation Coordination Council. And that was the group. It was comprised of elected officials throughout the region that served as our TPO. So this goes back before the creation of the NVTA. Our MPO never really did that level of work for the region because, again, we have a multi-state MPO. So we had the Transportation Coordinating Council that did the work prior or served as the TPO prior to the creation of the NVTA. Your next question was in regards to when did we decide to issue debt? I will say straight off the bat, one of the reasons why we did that, and this gets back to one of the bullets I had in the governing legislation, HB 3202, which was the initial transportation funding bill, we filed a bond validation suit. That bond validation suit allowed us to do several things. If we were successful, it lets us know that the law as it stands would not go or could not be challenged again, if you will, if we were successful in court. Back in 2007, I think at that time it was 7 taxes and fees that would fund the authority. The difference between 2007 and 2313, or one of the primary differences, was that the authority was to collect those revenues. So while we won in the circuit court, we lost in the appeal because the challenger said while the authority was primarily comprised of elected officials, they were not elected to collect those taxes and fees. Mm-hmm. So we went and we laid dormant until 2313. So this time the Virginia General Assembly, they said, okay, instead of the authority being the collector of the revenues, the General Assembly put in that the Commonwealth collects the revenues. So now as it's structured, the Commonwealth collects the revenues and then they remit the amount of money to Northern Virginia, they remit those funds to us. but we filed a bond validation suit again, because again, we wanted to make sure once we were funding projects, we were not in a situation where we would be challenged legally about the whole structure of the funding bill and other things, our process in funding the projects. So we filed a bond validation suit. We had a project list, went to court. I did have to testify in court. The judge ruled in our favor, and subsequently the final ruling was the structure of HB 2313 was ruled valid. So that's really why we filed the bond validation suit, and we ultimately issued debt. And we are still paying on that debt. It's not a huge amount, I should say. It's about $87 million. But that's what was really our primary decision on going forward to issue debt, because we wanted to support that bond validation suit.
Okay, are there,
Mr. Chair,
yes,
Vice Chair Carroll, I'd like to ask a question if I may.
please do.
First, Monica, thank you very much for joining us today. And that was a very informative presentation. Looks like you have quite the challenge and operation up there in Northern Virginia. My question, the follow-up question to Mr. Brown is, how long from the onset or creation of your organization to when you actually issued the first first debt?
So when HB 2313 was adopted in 2013, try to say that quickly, the bill passed July 1. We filed or I should say it was implemented, if you will. The implementation started July 1. We started working on the paperwork to file the bond validation suit immediately. So it was later on in the month of July, we filed the bond validation suit. We wanted to do that before we got too far into the planning. So it was weeks later.
So, but when was your authority created?
It was created in 2002.
Okay, so you were created in 2002, and it took until 2013 before you were in a position to actually issue debt.
Well, yes, because again, when we were created in 2002, the referendum to give us funding did not pass. So the creation of the authority passed, but the funding did not. And then 2007 was the next opportunity when there was a bill on the table to provide funding. And at that time, when I speak about the authority, this also involves Hampton Roads. We were joined at the hip in this because their funding was a part of HB 3202 and HB 2313 as well. So when the 3202, when we filed the bond validation suit and won in the circuit court and lost in the appeals, again, we lied dormant regarding getting the authority truly up and running. We were still doing the long range transportation plan, and that was being done on a voluntary basis by the locality and agency staff. We were still doing that. We were still making recommendations to the Commonwealth Transportation Board on CMAQ and RSTP funding, but the authority did not have a staff. Every year we were going to the General Assembly saying, hey, we need revenues, And it all came together again in 2013 when it was passed again. So yes, from 2002, I don't want to say we lay dormant, but we just didn't have the revenues to really implement some of the core responsibilities that the authority was charged in doing.
So follow-up question is, during that time frame, though, I think you probably were at least able to establish what those projections would look like once a revenue stream was put in place. Is that right?
Yeah, we were, and I will note when 3202 passed back in 2007, it was estimated to bring $300 million worth of revenues to Northern Virginia. And then, of course, it failed. When HB 2313 was in draft, I was contacted and said, well, how much does the region need? And I said, well, according to our last or most current long range transportation plan, we need $47 billion to implement these projects over the next 25 years. Now, of course, we were not going to get $47 billion over the next 25 years, but we knew that since the General Assembly had passed 3202, and that was $300 million, we felt that that was a good number to go with again for the General Assembly to work with. And at that time, when 2313 was adopted, there were 3 revenue streams coming to the authority. We had sales tax and grantor's tax, and then called the transient occupancy tax or the hotel tax. That's how it was structured for the authority at the time HB 2313 was adopted.
Did you work with a financial organization to give you advice on the bonding process and how much you would be positioning yourself to issue?
Absolutely, we did. We hired a financial advisor. They worked with us. We had to go over our presentations before we made the trip to New York to get the credit rating. We had bond counsel that also worked with us as well, because they wanted us to be prepared, because essentially an entity like ours, we really didn't know what kind of credit rating we would get. And we ended up getting AA+ across the board. We were informed that that was the highest credit rating that the credit rating entities had given an authority of this nature, and we couldn't get a AAA, if you will, because we do not control the revenue stream. That is controlled by the General Assembly.
And one last follow-up question, if you don't mind. And this is all great. I mean, spectacular information. And I appreciate you coming today and sharing it with us. How long did that process work? Because we're in the process of looking at the same thing here. And, I'm just curious as to how long your process took, so that it gives us an idea of how long it may take for us to put ourselves in a position with our financial advisors to come out to the community and let them know, number one, what our long-term projects are going to be and goals are, and then, how we plan on trying to fund that through perhaps a bonding process.
Yes. So the implementation of HB 2313 started July 1 of 2013. We issued debt in December of 2014. Okay. Now you have to take into account, we had the bond validation suit. So that took time, and we wanted to make sure we came out favorable on that end. After we were successful with the bond validation suit, that's when we moved full steam ahead and trying to actually issue debt and working with the financial advisors and bond counsel and putting our package together.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I will yield for any other person who may have a follow-up question for Ms. Bachman, but thank you very much for coming today. And
thank you.
Appreciate the presentation.
Commissioners, do you have any questions to ask Ms. Bachman? Okay, if not.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I actually had one I wanted to yield to others. Just one point of clarification, Ms. Bachman. Again, thank you for the detail. Is it fair to say that because the NVTA did the bond validation suit, the other authorities in Virginia, and us being your younger sibling, would not have to go through that process? Because essentially our statute is structured and modeled off of the statutes of NVTA and HR TAC.
Well, thank you for the question. Now, I will preface this by saying, I am not a lawyer, so I don't want for you to take my word as bond. But I think when we filed the bond validation suit, and Kevin Page is up after me, I think that actually covered Hampton Roads as well. Now, I think because we have these authority structures in place, I'm not sure if you would have to file a bond validation suit or not, because while there are some similarities in the legislation that created CVTA versus the authority, there are some differences as well. So I don't want to say you would or would not have to file one, but at that time when we filed, I believe it applied to Hampton Roads as well.
Yeah, and maybe Mr. Gregory can speak on that. Thank you, Ms. Bachman. That was what a lawyer calls a leading question.
Again, Ms. Bachman, thank you so very much for your cogent presentation. Very helpful. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parsons, you want to introduce the next person?
Yes, sir. Next guest to join us is Mr. Kevin Page, Executive Director of Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. I believe the presentation is on the screen, and I think Mr. Page is joining us by phone. Hopefully he's able to unmute.
Yeah, I'm going to try to shoot from my computer here, Chet. Can you
There
all
we
hear
go.
me okay?
Yes, sir.
Good morning. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the CVTA board. It's been great to follow Monica in sharing both our commission's authorities successes and also you'll see the inherent similarities and differences between NVTA and HR TAC and CVTA. As I was set to prepare this presentation today, I wanted to just start with a comment that is always stuck in my mind is that commissions and authorities for a regional purpose all have their own inherent differences and similarities. And there is no real true cookie cutter approach to this. And I really appreciate you all having the objectivity to look at both NVTA and HR TAC and in review of our successes and also our differences as we move forward with you all to provide this information to you. Chuck, can you go to the next slide, please? As Ms. Bachman talked about earlier, is that there was a Hampton Roads Transportation Authority that was created at the same time as NVTA. We were declared unconstitutional, that authority was. And then we came back around at a later date, I'll talk about in just a minute. But the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund and the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund are the two funds that HR TAC has control of in not only the receipt of those funds, but the investment of those funds and distribution and management of those funds as well. The HRTF was created in 2013 as part of HB 2313, as Ms. Bachman talked about. That was a pretty landmark legislation probably for both the commission and the authority, as you've heard. The interesting piece of this is that there was no authority in Hampton Roads for the administration of those funds. So during a brief period, the HRTPO was the recipient and administrator of those funds, which was later declared as somewhat not necessarily the best approach because the HRTPO is a non-legal entity. As you all know, they're the federal authorized planning partner for the development of the TIP and other federal planning responsibilities. Our most recent add to our portfolio was the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund, which was created in 2020. We were very pleased to be a part of that because it certainly brings HR TAC from being that highway-centric improvement program commission to one multimodal presence moving forward. It's been a great opportunity for us and certainly have enjoyed working with HRT in that endeavor. So as I mentioned, in 2014, HR TAC was created, again, coming from the TPO over to HR TAC. It stood up as its own state authorized through this act of legislature. And that certainly was a game changer because then it pulled us forward after HB 1253 kicked in. The commission unplugged the HRTPO and then moved forward in its own right and standing up that organization. In 2015, in August, they hired me as their first executive director. As you can only imagine, those of you who might remember former Senator Frank Wagner, who met me my first day in office, and he said, we have a checkbook here. Do you know anything about QuickBooks? And oh, by the way, we don't necessarily know how to make payroll for you, nor do we have health care or VRS lined up for your defined benefit and retirement program. So from that point forward, we moved very quickly to stand up the organization, marshal forward. We broke ground on our first project in September of 2015, and it has been a nonstop run down the highway and also now over to the transit side since that point. HR TAC has some very broad brush powers. We have the ability to procure, finance, build, and operate highway, bridge, tunnel, and rail and transit projects in Hampton Roads. We don't have quick take powers that is held and cherished by the VDOT commissioner, but we certainly have a regional capability of doing quite a few things, including being the designated identified public entity for P3 projects, which is another nice concept to have and power and authority in their back pocket. We have the ability to use our monies, collect tolls. Necessarily, we're restricted under the HRTF, which I'll talk about in a minute, to only highway congestion expansion projects. for congestion relief. Then moving forward, we have, I want to emphasize this to CVTA, the regional collaboration that we have working closely with the TPO and also VDOT and our 14 jurisdictions that are part of HR TAC. Next slide, please. We have 19 voting members, 10 cities, 4 counties, and 5 General Assembly members that sit on HR TAC. We also have 4 non-voting ex officio members, 1 member of the CTB, Mr. John Bulbin, the VDOT commissioner or his or her designee, DRPT, Director Mitchell sits on our commission, as well as the Virginia Port Authority has a designee that also sits on the commission ex officio. We certainly have locked in where the 10 cities mayors are the highest elected officials. And we were having some challenges because at the county level, the County Board of Supervisors elects a chair every year. So for continuity of operations of HR TAC, we went back under House Bill 1111 in 2016, did some tweaks to HR TAC authorizing code, and also allowed for the governing body of the Board of Supervisors to designate one of their elected officials in lieu of the chair of the Board of Supervisors to serve on HR TAC. It's really helped us keep a quorum and also, again, continuity of operations moving forward. Next slide, please. The HRTF, the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund, consists of 2 sources. We have the additional sales tax of 0.7% that brought us in $146.2 million audited for FY20. We also have an additional regional fuels tax, which was converted back to a cents per gallon tax. Thank goodness for that. It was a little hard, I think, both for DMV and also Department of Tax. We were working through those challenges. That brought in for us $55 million of revenue in FY20, combined revenues of $201.2 million in FY20. And again, as I mentioned earlier, state code requires that those funds be spent on highway road construction projects for congestion relief that are designated as the highest priority projects in Hampton Roads. Next slide, please. The Hampton Roads Regional Transit Funds, I mentioned, is a newcomer to us here in Hampton Roads. Very pleased to have it here in Hampton Roads because it certainly leveled us out and brought some continuity to transportation in Hampton Roads. As I like to say publicly, and I'll say it today, in Hampton Roads, transit is no longer a highway alternative to transportation. It is now part of the transportation family and suite of projects that we provide multimodal solutions in Hampton Roads. There are 2, actually 3 revenues. One is the statewide recordation tax, which is $20 million off the top of those tax revenues. And then there are 2 revenues that are only applied to the 6 jurisdictions that are members of the HRT Commission. They just apply the funding to that. And that's the grantor's tax of 6 cents per hundred and the transient occupancy tax of 1%. Transient occupancy tax actually kicks in. It had a delayed enactment. It comes effective this month of May coming. So we're ramping up for that as well. The cities of Chesapeake, Hampton, Newport News, Virginia Beach are the 6 cities that I mentioned. And so when you look at the governance and structure of HR TAC, they are, those 6 mayors are on the Regional Transit Committee of HR TAC, which is included in our bylaws. That make those recommendations for the administration and distribution of those funds to HRT. Estimated combined revenues is $32.2 million in FY2021, and we didn't waste any time getting started. We went ahead and have funded our first set of projects of HRT in December of 2020, and we're working on an MOU right now for them to kind of carry us through 30 years of relationship between the 2. Next slide, please. I think it's important because there have been some questions here today, which I think were very good, which leads to the information I'm about to. Not like NVTA, HR TAC does not have the federal planning responsibilities that Ms. Bachman has under her seat in Northern Virginia. The HR TPO and HR TAC certainly have had to sit down and define its roles, and that was part of how we marshaled and set up HR TAC as it became the responsible party for the HRTF. So as you can see under the TPO, they have all of the TPO related planning relationship responsibilities. They cover the long range transportation plan, RSTP and CMAQ monies are allocated by them. They maintain the TIP. And then we at HR TAC pick up on the HRTF, funding the high priority projects, which I'll talk about in a minute, that process. And then we issue debt and also collect tolls, et cetera, for highway, bridge, and tunnel projects, as well as now the HRTIF transit program. Next slide, please. So here's kind of what I call the three-legged stool for an HRTF project. Each leg is a very important piece of this, is the planning, the programming, and the finance and delivering of our projects. The HRTPO, as I just mentioned, covers those identification of those projects moving forward, and also how they will establish the high priority projects. And then we will actually provide through HR TAC a funding estimate and conduit for the constraining of the long range plan for the high priority projects for the region. By code, we are required to develop a 6-year program very similar to that of the CTBs, which has been very beneficial for us moving forward. And that 6-year plan, as I mentioned, feeds the LRTP funding plans. HR TAC allocates funds for specific projects, and then we will ask the HRTPO to add them into the TIP, or if it's a project we're funding through our relationship with VDOT, VDOT sometimes will do that as well. The CTB selects the locally preferred alternatives. That's their relationship with us, maintains a statewide TIP, allocates state funding to projects, a 6-year program that we have funded, and also if they share finance as well, and also awards smart scale funding projects. VDOT assists in project readiness and construction through HR TAC and VDOT. There is an MOA that we have with VDOT, and we also have an MOA with the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission / HRTPL. I'll talk about that for staff augmented services. Next slide, please. So getting more specific to HR TAC staff and support service, for direct employees, we have Kevin Page, myself, Executive Director. Executive Assistant is full-time as a direct employee. We have a Chief Financial Officer that's provided through the HRPDC Shared Services Agreement. We have a Bond Fund Accounting Manager that directly reports to me as a direct employee, an Accounting Manager that is provided through the HRPDC Shared Services Agreement. And in the family of the positions that I just mentioned under the Shared Services Agreement, there is a memorandum of understanding between the HRTPO and HR TAC, where those employees in the discharge of their duties to HR TAC are seconded employees and act in the position as an employee of HR TAC. So it's a very good working relationship, and one where the PDC had capacity to provide those services, and HR TAC was able to economize for the use of that agreement so that we didn't have to hire direct staff and carry them on the payroll for 2,000 hours a year when they weren't necessarily needed for that specific amount of time. We also engaged general counsel, bond counsel, and special counsel when we got more involved in the HRBT project. We felt at HR TAC we needed to make sure we had special counsel to advise us on that, and that's the specific use of special counsel has been for the HRBT project and also on our master tolling agreement that I'll speak to in a minute. We have investment advisors engaged by HR TAC, financial advisors engaged by HR TAC, as well as traffic and revenue is something that is very important to us, especially now that we're going into the Hampton Roads Express Lanes network, 44 centerline miles of hot tolling effective in October of 2025. HR TAC will, shall we say, for simple terms, be in the toll road business. Next slide, please. So here's kind of a graphic depiction of your trip to Hampton Roads from Richmond. Certainly, invite all of you to come to the beach and spend a lot of money, please. We certainly enjoy that. Spend the night so transit gets a piece of that action, as well as make sure you fill your gas tank and spend a lot at Best Buy and Kohl's and Targets, because we're all recipients of that here at HR TAC. Currently, we have $5.22 billion of projects, not only in our plan, but under construction and underway. $4.65 billion is being funded directly by HR TAC. That's a wonderful suite of projects beginning up on the peninsula. We have 21 centerline miles of road that is being improved from the 199 exit, which I like to refer to people commonly known as the Pierce's Barbecue exit or the Prime Outlet Mall exit, depending on your audience. I think those two, if anyone that's been down there certainly recognizes that. It runs all the way down to Jefferson Avenue, where the HOV lanes begin and start heading around through HRBT. Of those projects, we have segments 1 and 2 are in service. Segment 3 will be up and running hopefully the end of this year. The Queens Creek Trestles is something you'll see has probably been one of our biggest challenges. And again, moving around, coming around the circle there. We have the Hampton Roads Express Lanes Network, which is a new add to our program. In our 6-year program coming, we have $6.1 billion of expenditures that will be fully under construction and delivered by October of 2025. We also have $217.4 million of the transit program that will also be delivered during the same time frame. The Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project is our biggest project. HRBT is a $3.86 billion project. HR TAC is providing 92% of total project costs. And for the expansion piece of that project, we're providing 95% of the cost of that project. It's the largest single cost investment project initiative undertaken in the history of the Virginia Department of Transportation. So it's a huge project, one that I'm very pleased to say that we have been a funding partner of, and feel that when I first came to HR TAC, HRBT was a project that had a no symbol right beside it. No, we will not build that project. And very quickly, we came around to understanding the magnitude of congestion that could be relieved by that project through some great efforts that we had both regionally and coming together in that collaboration, and also working with VDOT and understanding the magnitude of that project and the importance of our financial participation. The I-264-64 interchange is another project coming on around the circle there. That project will be completed in 2021. That takes us all the way down to Witch Duck Road. If you haven't seen that project, it's something worth looking at as to how we're getting those weave ramps into place there. The I-64 Southside Widening High-Rise Bridge project will be completed in 2022. As you come around that side of 64, you'll note that the high-rise bridge is at about 100 feet off the water line now, and they're pouring concrete on that bridge, moving very quickly as we move forward. We've had some studies that are leading us now all the way around to College Drive, heading to Monitor Merrimack, and also funded a study to move forward to help the HRTPO understand what their next regional projects are going to be once we complete the 6-year program moving forward. As I went back to the TPO, I noted to them very quickly around 2018, I said, you know, we've already conquered all of the projects and accomplished the ones you thought it would take us 40 years to. Now we need some more projects to tackle next. Of the suite of projects you see here before you, the first 200 lane miles and first $1 billion worth of investments, that's excluding HRBT, are HR TAC projects. We actually engage VDOT through a standard project agreement to act on behalf of HR TAC as a general contractor to build these projects, develop these projects, and through an agreement, VDOT will maintain those projects moving forward once they're completed. The HRBT project is a little different. In that case, VDOT was the state party of record for the P3 procurement, because this design build project was procured under a P3. And so they're the project owner, project developer, and of course, P3 designated entity. HR TAC is coming to the table as the project funder of that, primary project funder thanks to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for the smart scale funds we received on the first 6 projects, and also for the $200 million we received on HRBT. So moving forward to the next slide, if I may. So as our next big game changer here is the Hampton Roads Express Lanes Network. This is 44 center line miles of road. You will see there it starts at West Jefferson, runs all the way around to Bowers Hill through the HRBT project. This project adds another $806 million of project cost, which we're adding to our 6-year program. More refining it this year. It was added in our last program update last fiscal year. And moving into that, also want to thank the General Assembly for the $93.1 million that was included to fully fund the suite of projects necessary to open this 44 center line miles of road, tolling day 1 of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project. So as you look at this suite of projects that I've given you in the overview today, HRBT alone adds 28,000 jobs to the lifetime of that project over the next 5 years. And that magnitude has just been really great for Hampton Roads moving forward. As you can see, we have quite a bit on our plate right now. I didn't include a slide of what's ahead of us, but our $5.5 billion project list has now grown to $9.55 billion in our 2045 plan update. And we've provided a constrained long-range plan to develop and deliver those projects moving forward. Inclusive as well as $552 million for the long-range program for the HRTIF program, again, to move forward those projects identified in the transit long-range plan for Hampton Roads Transit. At this point, I'd like to really thank the Department of Rail and Public Transportation for their leadership and forward-thinking vision to develop the transit strategic plan and fund that with HRT. If we did not have that strategic plan in place, it would have been very challenging for us to move forward so quickly with the HRTIF program. So again, I wanted to thank the leadership at DRPT and also the leadership of our congressional representatives to move forward with the development of the HRTIF program and to bring it to HRTAC as one of the suite of project programs that we have in place. Next slide, please. So I just want to leave you here today with some opportunistic time to do some Q&A. I want to thank you all very much for the time and opportunity that I've had to spend with you all here today. I've spent some time with the staff of the CVTA in some initial thoughts and comments, and certainly very pleased to come more formally today before the board as to how you all, again, look at celebrate the presence of HRTAC and also NVTA with you today as to how you move forward with your development goals and objectives. I can also talk about bonding and things of that if anyone has any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Any questions from commissioners?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the conclusion of my report.
Okay, I want to thank the two presenters very much. Also want to thank Mr. Parsons for having also wonderful to kind of bring 2 other great organizations on transportation so that we can see as we're growing what some of our challenges may be. Again, Ms. Bachman and Mr. Page, we thank the children so very much. And this will be helpful, and I'm hopeful to all the commissioners of the CVTA. Yeah?
Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos Brown. I just wanted to say that I want to provide a special thanks to Mr. Page, because as we were birthing the idea of the authority and working on draft legislation, I had the benefit of his wisdom and experience, and as we learned from prior experiences. So I want to especially say thank you to Mr. Page, because he was maybe a midwife, as you would say, in the process.
Thank you. Any other comments? We have not. Again, we thank our 2 presenters. Okay, and all that came under the rubric of of, also Mr. Mayor also. So now we go to item 6, CVTA Technical Advisory Committee update. Mr. Todd Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the TAC update from CVTA, the last meeting we held was on April 12th. Continued focus on the 3 items that are listed in the agenda. The first being the regional project prioritization process. The subcommittee last met on Friday, April 16th. And we'll meet again this afternoon in their continued work on developing a process for identifying key regionally significant projects to be funded through the 35% regional fund of the CBTA. Key points that the subcommittee is focused on include the following: limiting the focus of the 35% funds to a truly regional projects. To accomplish this, the committee is setting thresholds on projects to qualify through data like the average daily traffic volumes of the facility, the functional classification and type of facility. Use of the RRTPO prioritization tools that are being developed as part of the long range plan, or we're looking to use those as the foundation for the project assessment. Potential projects will be tested by staff and the resulting scores will be used in determining how to rank and prioritize the projects. It's basically a series of test cases to kind of back test the projects that each locality sees as a regional priority and see how they score out in the long range transportation plan process. Next steps include evaluating a sample set of projects through the model and then deciding if additional changes or adjustments should be made to develop CBTA priorities. And the next area of focus has been the regional public transportation plan. Grtc is continuing to work with Jarrett Walker to develop the regional public transportation plan. The focus at this time is working with all 9 localities in the region to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table and determine the best direction forward on the regional public transportation. Grtc is proposing a micro-mobility study for FY22 intended to engage the rural jurisdictions regarding their anticipated public transportation needs. Next steps include bringing a draft plan to the CBTA TAC at the May meeting, working through the review process with CBTA and RRTPO TAC Finance Committee and the RRTPO Policy Board, and then the full CBTA approval in June. The last area of focus has been the Transit Service Governance Report. CBTA staff and Transit Service Governance Subcommittee continue to work with the consultant team to develop a report which is due by the end of June. The consultant has wrapped up stakeholder interviews with 17 interviews held with 40 individuals representing 13 stakeholder groups. Peer agency evaluations are being developed with a focus on 5 agencies that have similar characteristics to GRTC. And AECOM, which is the study consultant, will develop a strategic assessment and benchmarking of CVTA compared to Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and HRTAC, and evaluate if a transportation district could be a consideration for the region going forward for GRTC governance purposes. And this report will be completed for approval by CVTA before the end of June. It's in there, my report. Be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Ewell?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Ms. Canova Peterson, Hanover County. I guess my question has to do with the Transit Service Governance Report. I think we're all been aware of Henrico County's position that they need to have a seat at the table because of the amount of funding for GRTC that is actually coming from Henrico County. And of course, we're all in this to work for the good of the region, and we're willing to do that. But as this thing is going forward, I just want to be clear that, for instance, looking at all the projections that I've seen, I'm going to speak for Hanover County, and I may be being echoed by some of the other smaller jurisdictions. But within very short order, Hanover County is going to be providing about 10% of the funding for GRTC. And we're getting no services. And we have no voice, no seat at the table. those things are not acceptable. If we're all providing the funding, we all have to have a relatively seat at the table relative to our ownership in this the transit service. So I just want to make this clear as the committee is looking at this governance report, that it's important that all jurisdictions have representation at the table.
Mr. Chairman, David Williams, Powhatan County.
Williams?
Good morning, sir. Hanover County is correct. We are concerned in Powhatan County as we take this journey, being a regional transportation authority, we want to make sure, just like I shared with the consultants, that we do have a seat at the table and that we're part of this experience and that we're getting some proportional return to our investment in the authority. So, yes, we share the same concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Williams and Ms. Pearson. Other comments on this?
Mr. Chairman, Patricia Page from New Kent County. Sir, as I made it known in our interview and conversation that New Kent County absolutely shares the same concern as Hanover and Powhatan. However, we don't have Greater Richmond Transit, but we do, however, have a transit program here in New Kent. And so it would absolutely be acceptable for New Kent to have a seat at the table. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Obviously, having expressed these are things we must take into consideration. So thank the three of you for sharing your thoughts with us. Okay, now we go to other business. CVTA member comments.
Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos again. I know I've been very engaged today, so I apologize, but I think this is a very important meeting, and I wanted to provide some context to some of the commissioners who may not have been involved in the precursor of the CVTA. You heard the two models that were described today, the MBTA and the HR TAC. And I think it's important for us to understand that the CVTA was designed to mirror more closely the HR TAC model, where the TPO or Plan RVA was designated to be the long-range planning piece of the regional transportation plan, because that's what they do, that's what they've done, and obviously it had broad participation. But the CBTA was designed to be the implementer of that plan. And so I wanted to make that point because the way our legislation was drafted and crafted, we don't have the overlay where Plan RVA essentially was transformed to be the CBTA. We have a scenario where deliberately the decision was made with the input of the various jurisdictions that the CBTA would be independent and separate of Plan RVA, although Plan RVA would retain its regional transportation planning activity. So that's one point that I think it's important for everyone to recognize is that is how we were designed and architected. The second piece that I think it's important is we saw the magnitude of projects that were implemented by MBTA and HR TAC, and having some history in both from my role in CTB, but also in just working with the various agencies as we were designing the CBTA. They both took the approach that in order for all of the jurisdictions to participate and benefit and to be able to demonstrate a benefit from the new authority and the new tax and revenues, that taking a very aggressive approach to multiplying the dollars so that we could actually execute a broad range of projects touching all of the participating parties or jurisdictions was very important. And so part of this conversation that I'm having about the bonding and the illustration is not that we per se will be ready to do that this year. But it is important that if in fact we are going to take the roughly $200 million and be able to have some truly transformational impacts and make sure that we're inclusive of all the jurisdictions that are contributing, then that is the way to do it, right? Because otherwise, if you do a pay-as-you-go model without bonding, then 2 or 3 of these projects that are kind of being talked about could soak up all of the revenue. In addition, I think you saw the leveraging that occurred from a smart scale perspective, right? And this was one of the arguments that I'd made over the years, was that HR TAC was able to get the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel done, not because smart scale came in and provided billions of dollars, but because it had its own funding. But because it had its own funding, it was able to get a fairly large chunk of dollars contributed to those projects, which was to the detriment, quite frankly, of the Richmond region, because when you looked at the state high priority pool and smart scale, the regional MBTA initially and then HR TAC were able to leverage their dollars to attract the vast majority of the high priority dollars, such that the Richmond region wasn't able to see that benefit. So we're now in a position where we can compete, but again, only if we think about it broad. So I just wanted to commend those comments for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Other comments?
Mr. Chairman, David Williams, I'd like to thank Mr. Brown for his clarifying comments. Most helpful, sir. Thank you.
Other members? Again, I'd like to thank Mr. Chair Parsons for bringing some colleagues from out of town who have these authorities, transportation authorities, and it shows you some of the opportunities that we have. And also, Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Page, and Mr. Williams brought up issues that are very, very important. And to add what Mr. Brown has said, so we're in the conversation part now. And before you implement, do anything, we have to talk. We also may have to make sure we understand what our colleagues are asking for. Because remember that above all things, that we talk about laying the best foundation. And what is endemic in all of these discussions is we want to make sure that the family is cohesive and together. And most families that are cohesive, they're together for the most part. So I feel when Mr. Peterson, Mr. Williams, and Mrs. Page mentioned the fact about, that they want to feel as a part of this. And so when I use my analogy of making sure that all family members are together, I think you understand where I'm coming from. And I'm so appreciative of your comments, and also that we had input from other persons who've gone this route. And so again, I thank each of you for being with us at each of these meetings. And speaking of the next meeting, we'll go to that. Are there any other comments? Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, before we wrap up, I think sometimes when we ask about the table, Mr. Chairman, this is the table. I just want us all to remind all the localities involved, particularly when it comes to regional funds to GRTC, all localities are at the table currently with CVTA approving regional transportation plan. We are at the table. This is the table. General Assembly created the table. I just want to make sure we all remember that these are regional dollars, not locality dollars. These are regional dollars for the regional funding and planning process right here at the table. This is the table.
Okay, here again, that's the importance of what I call conversation and dialogue. So I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, our next meeting, guess what? It's going to be in a different location. We've been invited. That next meeting, by the way, is May the 28th. And we've been invited many times to other places. So we're going to attempt this time. I think that's in Colonial Heights, Mr. Ewell. Yeah, we've been invited there several times, but we all want to feel safe and all that. So we're going to try an in-person meeting on the 28th, but also with the virtual option. Okay, so I just want to let you know, and that again is on May the 28th. I thank you so very much for participating this morning. It was a little bit longer, but you know why? Because we had input from colleagues from other jurisdictions sharing with us some type of growing pains that we may have and the opportunities that we have before us.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
We are talking about the VDOT building for the next meeting, and that actually is in Chesterfield County.
Okay, all right. So noted. So noted.
Have to brag a little bit. It's a fantastic facility.
Okay, all right. We'll see, right? We'll see on the 28th. Very good. Thank you for the invitation. And good health and keep safe, all commission members. We are adjourned.
Thank you,
Everyone, great meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.